Starting in just a moment, everybody. Wonderful. Great. Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and begin. It's the top of the hour. And welcome everybody to Meeting of Minds. And 2025 Meetings of Minds has been extremely popular as we bring amazing trainers speaking about different areas of expertise with regard to EFT. And so I'd like to introduce our special guest today, Grania O'Neill. And so Grania trained in EFT in 2008. She became a master trainer in 2012. She specializes in working with women who are lacking in confidence and are suffering from, as many of you know, imposter syndrome, which is a very common situation in EFT practitioners, right? Especially as they're just beginning. Her approach is to build people up from the inside out and strengthening the core sense of self, nurturing the belief in themselves and creating the inner conditions so that they can thrive as practitioners and personally. So for Grania, the most important piece of her work is about facilitating change and at a very deep level, often working on negative beliefs, and beliefs are the filter, as we know, through which we see the world and affect us on every level. So you might want to know that her journey has taken her from Dublin to London to Sydney and 3.5 years in China before returning back to Ireland, where she now trains from in 2010. Today, she's here to talk to us about working with tabletops. And as the expert on the floor on that, Grania, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you. We will have the opportunity for there to be breakout groups and in the chat for you to post questions and then to bring back after contemplation from the breakout groups after the presentation feedback that I'll be able to ask on your behalf of Grania. So we will receive any comments you receive in the chat. So without any further ado, Grania, would you mind beginning?
Lovely. Thank you, Craig, for that introduction. And I'm delighted to be here and to talk to you about working with tabletops. And I suppose it's one of the things that I absolutely love working on. And just to say, what I'm going to do today is just to walk you through the process, walk you through the process of working with tabletops. And I suppose using the benefit of things that I've noticed, things that I've found worked or didn't work so well, and just to talk about that. And one of the things that I always say to my practitioners is that, our job as practitioners is to be a detective, and to have a gentle curiosity to see, well, actually, where has this come from? Where have the beliefs come from? So the basic format of today, and I haven't done a lot of slides, but I'm just going to share what I have with you. And just to show you the basic format of what I'm going to work with today. And let me just see if I can go down there and expand the slide. There we go. So this is the basic format of what I'm going to be talking through today. So the first of all is, talk about soothing and alleviate symptoms before we start to work on tabletops, establishing your benchmark, so testing the intensity of the belief or the tabletop. Then we move on to finding and clearing the events. And then, of course, then the final phase is testing the intensity again. And then we repeat the process. So I'm just going to kind of walk very gently and slowly walk through all of the steps with this. So I'm just going to stop the share now and I'll share some other slides as we go through. So the first thing that we want to do is that when we start to work with somebody, that we want to alleviate and soothe symptoms. And, it's really nice practice, really good practice to help to bring the client into the room or just to relax them into the process of working with us, building rapport, enhancing that feeling of safety. So some lovely gentle techniques that we use. One of my favorites is just the constricted breathing. And it's such a nice, gentle technique and such a nice, gentle way of working. And all we do is we get the client to take in a big, deep breath and just to notice how far down in their belly it goes, or down to the base of their tummy, it's all the way down. And you can measure that in numbers. Okay, so 100, it goes all the way down to the base of their belly, or 30 or 40, it might be stuck in here. Or sometimes people might say, actually, I can feel it sticking in my throat, or I can feel it sticking in my chest. And it's such a gentle way of working with somebody. And it's a really nice way of relaxing them into the session, relaxing them into working with you. and building that nice sense of rapport. Another one, I'm just thinking actually of a client recently, and I noticed actually very early on that the breathing was kind of, I would say, we just did a sneaking up round, even though I'm nervous. That's another way of building rapport, even though I'm nervous about starting this work here today. And at the end of the round, I say, oh, take a breath in. And before I'd even gotten my breath in, she'd breathed in and out a couple of times. So I noticed actually that there was, her breath really was quite constricted. So we just did some gentle tapping. And it really just eased the client into the session and just helped her to open up. So just to remember all of these lovely soft techniques for gentleness, or using the body, or if they have tension in their shoulders or a tightness in their stomach. So these are all some lovely things that I would always start to do before starting to work with someone. And what we're going to do then is kind of move into the second phase. So the first is just to, I suppose, to have the gentleness, alleviate and soothe symptoms. And I'm going to talk mainly about, first of all, beliefs and how they affect. So again, I'm going to share my screen and just to share the slide here. And just to share an image of kind of a tabletop, and I'm sure we've seen images of something like this. Oops, there we go. And so the tabletop, and I'm just going to talk, as I say, about beliefs first of all. So I'm not good enough, a fairly typical belief that we'll come up against. And with the tabletop, what we're doing is we're working, the overall tabletop is the belief. And then we have, it's being supported by different legs. So here I have a couple of different events. So the teacher laughed at my writing, or I froze when I gave a speech. My ex said I was boring, or I was scolded when I said the wrong word. So these are all kind of typical events. And how do beliefs affect us? And as Craig said, the beliefs are filters through which we see the world. And they can affect us, they can stop us from achieving our goals. Because the more congruent and the more aligned we are with the goals, the more likely we are to achieve. And so let me just take an example. So say somebody, they see a job advertised and say, oh gosh, I have the experience. But then the voice comes into their head and they say, well, they won't hire somebody my age, or they won't hire somebody like me. So then they may not even apply for the job. Or they might say, look, I'm just going to fire in an application or fire in a resume, not even going to put much thought into it because I'm probably not going to get the job anyway. So they do it half-heartedly. Or else they might go into the interview, they get the interview and they say, well, I'm just here to tick that diversity and inclusion box, people my age or women like me or whatever. And so they go in with a very different energy. However, if they kind of think, my goodness, like I am perfect for this job. I've got X, Y, Z, Z skills, they would be so lucky to have me. So then they're much more likely to do the killer application, the killer CV, the killer resume, saying, this is why I am perfect for the job. They go in with a very different energy to the interview. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're always going to be successful. But if they're feeling more aligned and more congruent, they're much more likely to take the steps to help them to achieve their goal. So they really are the filter through which we see the world. And so where do beliefs come from? And what I always going to say to clients, and I say to my trainees that, we didn't pop out of the womb feeling like I'm not good enough, that something has happened. And our job is to be the detective to find out what has happened and to be specific and to find specific events. So how are beliefs formed? And lots has been written about us as children and between the ages of 0 and 6, that we are basically these sponges. We're just absorbing everything. We're just downloading everything. And if something happens, so say, for instance, we do something and a parent says, oh, bold girl, you're a very bad girl. And we might just take that on and just say, well, actually, I'm a bad girl or I'm not good enough. Because we don't have the maturity, we don't have the filter to say, well, actually, I can see that my mom or dad is stressed, or I can see that they're having a really bad day and this has nothing to do with me. So we don't have the filter and they don't have the maturity to recognize that. And also, we probably don't have the vocabulary to express that. Actually, hang on a second, mum or dad, I'm not that bad, you know. So that things can certainly start at that age. However, it's not just at that age. You know, beliefs can be formed at any age. So it could be something like an intense or traumatic event. And and just to say that there's lots of what I call small t traumas. And very often that we're working with these types of traumas, that things that while as an adult we might say that's not a big deal, but actually to a child, something like your classmates laughing at you or your friends making fun of you, that actually is the end of the world for them. And it's very, very traumatic. So we wouldn't classify it as a big T trauma, but still very, very intense. So it can happen at any age. So it could be when we're children or it could be later on. And then other ways of beliefs are formed is through our peers and social groups, media, social media. So there's lots of ways of how beliefs can be formed. So where does EFT come in and why is it so effective working with events? And I love this description of EFT where they say that EFT helps us to complete the process. And what I mean by that, it helps us to process the emotions of whatever events were present at the time. So it helps us to complete the process. So say, for example, as an adult, something happens and you completely overreact and you say, oh my goodness, where has that come from? And sometimes it might be the case that actually it's triggering something from our past. And rather than adult Grania responding, it's 5-year-old Grania reacting. And giving you an example of, say, your dog dies and you're crying, oh, my dog has died. And you're very sad about your dog. And then maybe a parent or an adult says, stop that crying, Grania. Big girls don't cry. And maybe you stop crying and you internalize what was said, or maybe you take on belief, well, actually, it's not safe for me to show my emotions, or my needs are not important, or big girls don't cry. Now, sometimes it comes out in the wash anyway, and we get to express our emotions, but sometimes it just gets stuck inside us. So, what we do with EFT is that we find these events, and we run through these events in a step-by-step manner. We really slow the process down, and we clear these emotions one at a time. And in doing that, then we complete the emotions that were present at the time. And maybe we didn't have the vocabulary to express them or weren't sure of what the emotions were at the time, but we get to complete the process with EFT. And then what that means is that rather than something happens and rather than 5-year-old Grania reacting, it's adult Grania responding. So I love that description. It helps us to complete the process. So before we go into kind of, talking about finding events, and I'm going to spend, a good chunk of this talking about how we find events, I'm just talking about something that has come up for me in terms of my work as a trainer and seeing the case studies and practice sessions from my students. And it's what I call statements of facts versus beliefs. And I noticed that sometimes, trainees and students, they would be submitting case studies and they got their benchmark, set their, how intense it was, and then they found an event, cleared it, and went back, and actually the intensity hadn't changed at all. And this had happened a couple of times, and I was kind of thinking, like, what is going on here? Why is this? And then when I looked at what their tabletop was, it was something like, I'm not seen or heard by my family, or I'm unloved by my mother. And yes, they found the events where like they weren't seen or heard by their family. They cleared it, but it actually didn't change the truth of the statement because actually maybe they weren't seen or heard by their family. So what I like to do is that I would say, okay, as a result of not being seen or heard by your family, what does that make you believe or think or feel about yourself? So I bring it back to the person. So it's just something to bear in mind that if you're working with something, I just think the intensity, I'm finding these events, but the intensity is not shifting. So bring it back. Okay, what is going on? What is that, as a result of that, what is that making me feel about myself? So when we're working on a belief or on a tabletop, we always get what we call a validity of cognition, so VOC, and you will see that very often in EFT literature. And what that means is that we're testing the intensity of the belief. So 10 is 100% true, and 0, it's not true at all. So we always like to get a rating so that we have something to measure when we found the event and cleared it, so we can go back and test it. So that's called the validity of cognition. And rather than asking the question, how true is this belief? I like to ask the question is, how true does this belief feel? And the reason I ask that is because logically we can know something is not true, but lots of us are not driven by our logical brain. We're driven by our feelings. So logically, I know that eating that third bar of chocolate is really not a good idea. But I'm feeling anxious or I'm feeling upset, whatever. So, so lots of us are really driven by our emotions. So when we ask that question, how true does this belief feel? It takes us away from our logical brain or whatever, and just brings us back into our feelings. And we can often get a different answer. So that's just something that I like to do. It's like, so how true does this belief feel? So I'm kind of going to walk through different ways of finding events, and it's not that you go through, oh, if this doesn't work, I do this. You can just use whatever feels right for you. And the first thing is, and it's all a really nice way of starting to work with somebody, is just to ask the client. And sometimes the client has very clear ideas. Okay, so what event has happened to make you have this belief? So sometimes the clients have very clear ideas about this. And we come up, they come up with maybe one or two scenarios, and then we can clear this about with using the movie technique or tell the story. They're usually the techniques that we use for clearing that. And often you might get kind of more recent events, and that's okay because you're kind of going for the lower hanging fruit. And again, it's a gentle way of starting to work with the beliefs. And I'm going to talk now about more of the kind of more unconscious ways of finding events. And only 5% of what we do is conscious and 95% is unconscious. So the unconscious mind is running the show. The unconscious mind is really the one that's running the show. So only 5% is conscious, 95% is unconscious. And so these are kind of some ways of trying to get to the more unconscious events that might have caused us to have this belief. So the first one is just to guess, ask the client to guess. And just to say about the unconscious mind, so the unconscious mind, prime directive or prime motivation is to protect us and to keep us safe. So it's coming from a place of love and it's really trying to look after us. And it has this gatekeeper, so it stops anything scary getting out or coming in. I like to think of it sitting here at the base of my skull, and it's like this guard dog, not letting anything in, not letting anything out. And so it's protecting us and keeping us safe. But one of the things that we can do when we're trying to get to the more unconscious events is asking the client, well, just to guess what might have happened. And then the gatekeeper, the guard is down saying, oh, we're only guessing here. And it just allows something to pop up. And very often it's something that is very, very accurate. So that's the first thing that we can do just to try and bypass the gatekeeper. The other thing is that we could ask them, if there was somebody like you who had this belief, what type of thing might have happened to them? And again, the unconscious mind, the gatekeeper says, nothing to see here, not talking about me at all. And it just allows something else another opportunity for something more unconscious to pop up. And usually, again, it's pretty accurate. And it allows the unconscious mind to present an event that represents some type of event or emotion that need to be processed in order for us to work on this belief. And just to give you kind of a couple of examples like this, I was working with somebody and asked the question, if there was somebody like you who had this belief, what type of thing might have happened? And they said, oh, an argument with a sibling and it's over a dress. And I said, okay, so can we just do a little movie technique or a little tell the story on this? And we start working on this. And then as we're going through, we're having this event, oh my goodness, this exact thing happened to me. So it's not something that they would have consciously thought of, but it just allowed it to be presented. Now, I do want to kind of exercise a bit of caution that, when we're asking people to guess or ask a question, if it was somebody like you, what type of thing might have happened to them, we do need to take care not to go too deep too quickly. So if they bring up something that's, we say, oh, actually, this is quite traumatic. We always have to make care that we want to go at the pace of the client's capacity. So we don't want to dive in too deep too quickly. And when we're starting to work with somebody, we're building up that trust and rapport. And I remember working with somebody, and it was early on in the process of working with them. And I asked them this question, and it was relating to work and not being able to speak up in work and not being able to, feeling that their opinion wasn't important. And very quickly, it came up with this event of actually an assault. And I just thought, look, this is too soon in the process for me to start working with that. So I just kind of gently kind of put it to that one side, and then we started working with more recent events. Now, a couple of sessions in, then the client actually brought up, said, I keep thinking about this event since we've started working together. So I just allowed it to come up gently. So not going in too deep too quickly. So always really, if you have the choice between going in hard, going in soft, always gentleness, going in softly. So I always kind of urge people to do that. So it's not that I've forgotten about the event, but I'm just saying, look, I know that this is there's something there, but just allowing it to gently to come up in the time that's right for the client. So not, I say, going too deep too quickly. And as I say, this person wouldn't have associated that with speaking up at work, because and actually it was a situation where they felt very intimidated. There actually wasn't a physical assault, but they felt very intimidated. They felt very powerless. They felt very vulnerable, and that's what we worked through then at a later stage. So that gives you lots of ways, first of all, for starting, to work with negative beliefs. But then we move on to the body, which is probably my favorite way of working with beliefs. So, and what I do is I actually get the client to say the belief. So say, I'm just going to say something like, I'm not good enough. And I get them to close their eyes and just to say it to themselves in their head a couple of times and just let it kind of like maybe rattle around their body and just to see where does it land or where are they noticing anything in their body. And when we ask this question, again, it kind of gets us out of our logical brain, the prefrontal cortex, back into the body. So we really get to what is the embodied feeling of the belief. And again, lots has been written about, the body keeps the score and how much wisdom the body has for us. And so this is another way of kind of finding events. And, when we talk about kind of the heart, even the heart has so much intelligence. And they say that the heart has a brain. So if we're just going with the logical brain, and yeah, it's got lots of intelligence there, but we're missing out on wisdom and intelligence that the body and the heart has to offer us. So I get them to focus on their body and say, okay, where are you noticing it in your body when you think of, I'm not good enough? And then I gently ask them, is this bringing any event to mind, or is this a familiar feeling? And again, gently allowing events to pop up that we can work on. And I'm just thinking about a woman again, I say I work a lot with people, professional women who got to a certain stage, they suddenly get promotion and think, oh, I don't belong here, I don't deserve it. And using the body, she came up with an event, and it was something that happened in school, and she was asked to speak, and she told to stop fidgeting, and I'm guessing that was fidgeting was probably a self-soothing thing that she was doing. She was told to stop fidgeting and to put her hands behind her back. And of course, then she made mistakes in her reading and was scolded by the teacher. So that was the first bit. That was one movie in itself. Then she went home to her parents to tell them what had happened, I suppose, in an attempt to try and process what had happened. and was met with very little sympathy at home, saying, well, you must have been doing something wrong. And so this client had no opportunity to process what had happened. So we actually had two separate events that we worked on. And once we cleared them, she just had this clarity. She said, I can just see all of these strands, how this has gone through all of my life and how she could relate it back to her work. And it was just gave her such clarity. Um, so they're kind of some of the ways, but we're also going to come up with some clients who can't think of anything. And we're always going to come up against clients with that. So, so we just start to tap. So even though I have no idea what might have happened, and just gently start to tap. Because then again, it's just taking the pressure off, because sometimes I think, oh my goodness, I have to think of something. And, we've done our gentlest, but it's just still not coming up with anything. So start to tap, even though I have no idea where this belief has come from, and just gently allowing something. Or something like I might ask them, if you just to guess an age of where something might have happened, and just allow a number to pop into your head. And it's not that necessarily that the number is going to be 100% accurate, but it just allows you in conscious mind to say, I'm just guessing a number. So what was going on around age 23? Oh, well, I've left college and it was my first job and something like that. Or if it's something younger, maybe age 5 or 6, well, age 5 or 6, there's not a lot going on in your life. You're probably at school, you're at home with your parents, something with siblings or friends, you could just say, even though I have no idea what happened, maybe it was something in school, or maybe it was something that happened with my siblings. And very gently, something is going to come up and to give you something to work on. So these are just some of the ways of kind of like finding events to work on. And once we find the event, so we have start with a gentleness, we get our rating, that's our benchmark. We find the event and then we clear that. And then we come back and we test again. So it's really important that we test. And by testing, we can see then whether any more work is needed to be done. So we get our measure, say the belief feels 80% true. And then we come back and we test. And we see if the intensity has shifted. And then if there's still intensity there, well, then there's more events that we need to find. I would say it's probably unusual to shift in with just one event. In my experience, Craig, you might kind of answer that, but usually I think there's more than one event, so it would be unusual, I think, to go from like an 80% true right down to 0. So usually there's more than one event. And sometimes people might say, well, I've done all this, I covered this before in my other therapies, and yet you're still bringing it up. So I say, look, why don't we just do a little technique just to see if we can clear whatever's there? Because the fact that they're remembering it, the fact that they're bringing it to mind, yeah, I'm guessing that there's something there. And so sometimes a tabletop isn't a belief, but it can be an overall emotion, or something like social anxiety or overall anxiety. And again, you could ask, well, okay, as a result, you have the social anxiety. So you might ask a question, what does it make me, what do I believe to be true about the world? Actually, the world is a dangerous place. Or what do I believe about myself? For instance, something like I have to worry. If I don't worry, something bad will happen to me. So that could be another way of working with it. Or you could just work with social anxiety and then using the body or something to say, where are you noticing in your body, and find events that way. Or something like lack of confidence or low self-esteem. So again, they're kind of, vague concepts, So again, like maybe what do they believe to be true about themselves? Or could be something like I'm not worthy or I don't deserve. Or again, you could just go with feeling in the body. Or sometimes people have come up with very vague things like, not feeling joy. I remember I had a client coming to me not feeling joy, and I thought, oh my goodness, what is that? Where do I start with that? But again, we use the body. This person actually had a great job, nice partner, earning good money, friends. She said, I should be feeling happier. And one of the events that we came out using the body, so I got to feel, okay, instead of, you're not feeling joy, so what are you feeling instead? Using the body. And one of the events we came up with, I remember, was actually being in school and where notes were being passed around and people would add on something and then the note would be passed to the next person. And then she read something that somebody had written about her. And, and again, as an ad, we say, that's not a big deal. However, for her 8-year-old self, that was pretty devastating, to read what they had written about her. Um, so just yeah, so using the body again is a lovely way of finding things with a more kind of what I can say like hard to quantify, hard to kind of get a grip on or handle on. Um, so we usually clear events, with something like the movie technique or tell the story. And I think different practitioners will be telling you, oh, movie technique is what it's all about. Other people have a preference for tell the story, and they both have their pluses and minuses. With a movie technique, I suppose the client doesn't have to share details. So that's lovely, if they don't want to share details for whatever reason. And then you also have the option of, putting it on a screen or, creating distance away from the event, making it small, putting it in black and white, to really getting the client to get out of it if it's a more intense event. And then with tell the story, I suppose they're telling you the details. So you have the opportunity to say, actually, I'm wondering, is there an emotion there? Because very often the client is shooting ahead to the crescendo, to the big high point, but actually sometimes there's other bits before they get to that are really part of the whole experience. And I remember working with somebody, and it was about in class, and they were having to read in Irish. So Irish is kind of a difficult language, and they were having to read it out in class. And actually doing the tell the story, and actually they said, oh, actually, yeah, the room was really hot and sweaty. So actually that added to the intensity. So, we're able to kind of work on that first of all, and that kind of all helps the gentleness by the time we get to the crescendo of, what they thought was the high point of them making the mistakes. So, so that really is, I suppose, the basis on which we kind of, and it just is kind of a step-by-step walk through kind of how to work with tabletops. And I know
Mhm.
we're kind of coming up to time here. And what I would love for people to do in their breakout groups is maybe to talk about creative ways that you have found of finding events. I'd love to hear, because there's lots of wisdom among all the practitioners here. Or maybe if there's something you've heard here, is there something you might have done differently, or you thought, well, actually, I could do something a little bit differently. So
Beautiful.
that's it. So thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for allowing me to be here
Thank you
today.
so much for stimulating that discussion, giving ideas. I love some of them. I'm not going to point out which ones are my favorite because I don't want to bias anybody. But yeah, let's go ahead and we're going to break up into groups of three. And we're gonna have about 10 minutes or so for you to discuss amongst yourselves just what Grania said is different creative ways or discussions about some of the ones that she mentioned that maybe were new to you. And when you come back, please feel free to post either your questions for Grania or your comments or different ideas into the chat, and then we'll have Grania respond to those. So goodbye. Magically, we're going to send you off amongst yourselves for the next 10 minutes. Wonderful. Okay, I hope that time was rich and productive, and we got to connect with some people from wherever, because EFT is international. So I hope you enjoyed that and would love to see in the chat any questions that you have that you'd like Grania to answer, or any creative ways of finding table leg events or going deeper on tabletops. Please feel free to comment in the chat for further discussion. Perhaps you have your own unique way of locating recent or earlier past events, or for tapping into the unconscious, subconscious, so to speak. Um, yeah, we would love to hear if somebody maybe from each group can post maybe the favorite way that they have, or maybe the one that you like most that Grania had offered, if it was new or unique to you. We'd love to hear from you now, because this is a way that we get to participate and hear from you. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions or ideas? Um, okay, so thank you. Ambuka was talking about the importance of using the body and gentleness. And I really love that. One of my favorite ways. So it was wonderful hearing you, Grania, talk about tuning into that energy and that emotion and that felt sense in the body. to allow it to connect to events that we may have had no idea was connected to that.
Yeah.
And, sometimes when I'm teaching and I do that, and I ask somebody to tune into where they're feeling that helplessness or that frustration and allow that. And I'll say something like, the body has a tremendous amount of wisdom.
Mm.
Why don't you don't have to figure this out right now. Take the spotlight off of them feeling the pressure to figure it out and
Mhm.
allow it to bring you back to another time that felt that way, which then allows that spaciousness to not, oh, it just has to be about helpless or it just has to be about don't cry.
Yeah.
So I love that. One of my favorites. We're having Tanya right now say, would you name the tabletop technique? I'm not sure what that means, but I'll let you take that on. We thought it might be useful to pre-frame that there might not just be one memory to work on, so that they're not disappointed when it doesn't resolve after processing one event. So maybe you could
Yeah.
speak to that first.
Yeah. That's a very good point, Tanya, because I think there is this perception out there, and people have seen all these other tapping, things are cleared in an instant. And yes, while EFT might be faster, move more swiftly than other techniques, it can, as I say, it can be more than one event. I don't quite understand your question about would you name the tabletop techniques? I'm not quite sure what that is, but absolutely, yeah, that is a very good idea to pre-frame with the client just to say, look, it's probably going to be more than one event. And so, yes, so that they're not disappointed. And I think that by testing at the end of the session, you have your rate at the start session and you test it again at the end of the session or the start of the next session, the client will see some progress, say, actually, okay, that felt more true. And yeah, so great. Thank you. Uh,
Wouldn't you say really? I mean, because we have tabletops that sit on top of tabletops.
yes.
The current tabletop of I'm not going to be the best person for that job
Yeah.
is like a smaller tabletop of I
Yeah.
never get what I need or I'm
Yes.
not good enough. So, and each
Yes.
of those personally, I don't know too many tables that only have one table leg
Yes.
um, and hold up for a long period of time as sturdy. So they're much more likely to pre-frame. Yeah, we're going to need to work on several events. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Great. Thank you.
We have another question that came up. How can we be certain that we cleared those memories enough to collapse or drop the tabletop? Clients sometimes come back with other issues or the same belief as the core issue even months later. And how do we try to avoid that?
Yeah. Well, I think that sometimes it's not that we haven't cleared it, but maybe other aspects related to it come up. And I remember working with somebody, and actually, it was around an event that had happened. And then actually, we cleared the event, and I thought it was all clear. But actually, when she was pregnant, she had different physical sensations around the event. And I hadn't come across that before. But it's not that we hadn't cleared the event, but she actually had a different body memory coming out of that. So sometimes maybe different aspects around it might come up. So yeah, so that can happen, or I'm sad that this ever happened. That might be another aspect that has come up, that you cleared the event, but actually there's sadness coming up around it. So sometimes
Mhm.
other aspects to it may come up.
That real life testing is really the ultimate gold standard, isn't it?
Exactly.
Is how it shows up in real life. If it's cleared, it is. And if
Yeah.
not, and there's other types of testing beside just VOC and SUDS as well.
Yes. Yeah.
One
Yeah. Yeah.
one one point that was mentioned that I think built on what you said is sometimes before it's safe enough to go to deeper places and earlier places, we
Yes.
can put it aside. And sometimes it's easy enough to say we can come back to that another time. And sometimes it's already really present. And as
Yes.
she mentions in the side, I think it was Buka, that we may want to contain that and
Yeah.
put that aside for a future time. And that's really relevant because tapping, the beauty of EFT is that it goes deep quickly. The
Yes.
danger of
Yeah.
EFT is that it can go deep quickly. So
Yes.
sometimes just because something comes up. Okay. Pre-framing is mentioned to be important. What else? How do you explain that to the client? Um, actually, hold on. Okay. So how do you explain to the client that there may be several events complicating why something isn't resolving quickly? How would you pre-frame that or explain that?
I think they explain the tabletop, and I think kind of doing a visual thing of saying, okay, if this is your tabletop and you've got different events propping it up, and you collapse one leg and it goes down a little bit, and then we do the next leg, and then it goes down a little bit. And I think even that visual of doing that, they can actually really relate to it. That one leg isn't going to make it collapse completely. And I think even doing something like that, the client can say, oh, yeah, yeah, it's not going to, one leg is going to make the whole table fall down. And that they can see that. I think that can be a useful way. Or if you have some kind of a visual representation, like some kind of a diagram, that can also be helpful also.
Right. Um, so Candace brings up, and I really love this that you brought this up. She says, could you repeat what a statement of fact is versus a limiting belief? Apologies if I didn't get it. I love that distinction because I definitely run into that. Could you maybe say a little bit more about
Yes,
that?
yeah, yeah. And as I say, it just, if you're working on something and, you tap on you get to what you call your tabletop, um, and you tap, you get your rating, you find your events, and you tap it, and then it still feels 80% true. It hasn't shifted at all. And then say, okay, like what is it? So just, I suppose, again, just to be a detective and to have a curiosity. So what's going on? So it's something like, my parents always favored my sister, or my I was always told that I'm not good enough. And maybe you were always told that you weren't good enough, you know. So, or yeah, I was told I was not as good as my sister. And then to bring back again, as a result of being told that you're not good enough, what does it make you think, or what does it make you believe about yourself? So it's just something to watch out for that. Yeah.
I think that's beautiful because, and one of the way to test it is it doesn't change. God was an angry man. Yes. It's not a belief, it's a statement of fact. It's true. So it's not going to really change much, is it? Now,
Yes.
what I
Yeah.
love is what did you decide about yourself or the world as a result? All men are going to be angry all the time at me, or I'm unworthy of being loved. Oh, okay, there's the belief. So sometimes we hear things, but it takes a follow-up question or two to find out their belief perspective that they've
Yes.
added to that statement of fact. So I love that you
Yes.
made that distinction. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Thank you.
Um, anything else that you there? Apparently that nailed it. Thank you. Right
You
on you.
did great.
What else might be useful here in this? Anything else that you'd like to add that came up either from the questions or maybe that you didn't get to put into the presentation?
I suppose kind of, sometimes, again, if we're doing the gentleness, and you have a tabletop. I mean, I just think about somebody, I was working with somebody and it was around grief,
Hmm.
and it was to do with the death of a parent, and it wasn't a traumatic event, but the client was still a few years later, still feeling a lot of sadness. So before we even got into anything specific, we did lots of gentleness, so something like a box technique. And, we start off doing a box technique and you put all the sadness and everything into a box and just to gently allow it to soften. And when I'm using a box technique, I don't necessarily get a rating or an emotion, because then that goes into the prefrontal cortex and the logical brain. So I just, because the unconscious mind loves metaphors and stories and images. So working with the box technique or container technique and just tapping on that is a really nice way of softening it. And that actually took, I remember the first session, and the second session we did something else softening. And then by the third session, they said, okay, I'm ready to go in. They just said, okay, I've done enough. I'm ready to go in. So, but again, I suppose I'd always err on the side of gentleness. So the more gentle we can be, the better. Yeah.
I mean, that really is the beauty of the gentle techniques is to take that edge off
Yes.
consciously, subconsciously, so that they can feel safer in their bodies to say, yeah, I'm ready for this now, whether we're using container or sneaking up or tearless trauma or whatever that is,
Yes.
to help take that edge off.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so we're hearing a question. I like the idea of gentleness. Good.
Yeah.
But EFT also talks about going to core issues. So how
Yes.
do you know? This is an excellent question. How do you know what information do you use to decide whether to stay on the gentle side with more distancing or
Yeah.
whether to go things in deeper sooner? Do you
Yeah.
just take
Yeah.
it from what the client says? That's a good
Yeah.
question for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
The client says, I'm ready. I'm ready to go there. And
yeah.
you're sensing,
Yeah. And
yeah,
I suppose,
please.
yeah, I'm looking at body language and I'm looking at, all of these things, looking at their breathing. I'm looking, noticing their expression on their face, and so I'm looking at all of these cues, and I will always err on the side of gentleness. Gentleness is just so important. And so yeah, so I will always kind of turn side gentleness. And sometimes you start working on an event and you think, like I remember working with somebody on an event and it was an argument with her parent. And I just thought, well, this is it's just an argument. And and then suddenly it becomes this big event. And I went, oh my goodness, okay. So we were doing a movie technique. So we took a step back or whatever. And I said, okay, look, we're just going to take you out of the movie or whatever, put it on a screen, make it really small and black and white. So we don't always know whether it is going to be traumatic, but I always err on the side of gentleness. Or the other thing that we could have done is we could have put it into a box or whatever and done some tapping around that to soften it. But I suppose I'm always looking at the client and I'm watching their expression, and I suppose listening to their language, because sometimes people can be very hard on themselves and I have to do this and they're determined to do it quickly, and they're in such a rush to get it done. And I suppose I would gently explain to them, look, you've had this belief for 35 years, like, what to give it the time it warrants and it needs, so yeah.
I love, and I use Gwyneth's analogy. I'd say, it's like I'm your seeing eye dog. You're telling me you want to cross the street. I can help you with that. But if they start crossing in the middle of the street and not at the corner when the light is green and cars are rushing by, I'm going to say, no, we're staying on the curb here. We're walking on the sidewalk here. Let's get to the corner. The light will turn green and then we can get across. So
Yes.
I think that, as you said, it's our responsibility to monitor for safety. And just
Yes.
because the person says, let's go, it's the first
Yeah.
session. I've been waiting to dig into this for a long time. Let's go. As the practitioner, I
Yeah.
have to really be conscious of
Yeah.
it, don't we?
Yeah.
All the
Yeah.
skills that you
Yeah.
said to monitor.
And even when we're testing, and I remember one time testing with somebody, and I was testing to, yeah, it's okay, whatever. Yeah, no, it's fine. And the whole body language is like, yeah, it's not fine. It's not fine. So then I just, just persisted with it just to make sure that the client, because I didn't want the client going kind of, leaving with that energy. So I really wanted to make sure that everything was contained and cleared because I knew, yeah, the words were, it's fine, but actually her body language clearly, it really is not fine. And like, what does fine mean? And also like sometimes people, when we're testing, we say, oh yeah, that's fine now. And actually then you say, okay, well, if I was to give it a rating and they say, well, that's 5 out of 5 or whatever, I was like, well, that's still pretty strong. And I think sometimes people are so used to living with low level anxiety that that's a norm. And that just becomes, yeah, this is just every day. Yeah. And just become so habituated to it that there's actually, there's still something there. So, yeah.
You know, place for additional testing. Somebody saying, yeah, it's fine, I'm done. It's like, let's try some vividly imagine.
Yes.
Let's do a little bit of role playing here.
Yeah.
Let's go. So we use deeper levels of testing to go, are there some remaining aspects here? And then again, of course, in real life. And how did that show up this week? And I think pre-framing that is like, it looks like it may be done, but we don't know.
Yes.
And real life may bring something else out. So if it does, please bring it back to the next session so that we can work on that aspect.
Mm.
Um, yeah. So Tanya's saying, yeah, for some people, fine isn't a zero. When you
Yeah.
say fine, it's like, yeah, if you can give that a number, even if you're a guest, oh,
Yeah.
maybe a 5. Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
fine
Yeah.
is not zero.
Yeah.
It's not done.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
thank you. Good point
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to really thank you, Grania, for taking your time, for preparing and being here and sharing your wisdom and experience and learning as a trainer. And I want to thank everybody that showed up today live and participated. We love that. And if you're watching this after the fact, as a evergreen recording, thank you for taking the time and make sure that the time that you're using this goes toward your annual CPD hours because it does. And lots of love coming your way right now, Grania. So
Thank you.
thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for your full participation. And we will see you next month in December. Please make sure and sign up for that. We look forward to seeing you then.